Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tech SEO Boost. For anyone joining us for the first time today, I'm Megan Lavin. I'll be one of your MCs today alongside Paul Shapiro and Aleda Solis. We'll be providing some information, some perspective, and some tips along the way. But please also know that at the top of our event site, there's an event FAQs tab, and that includes important information and also what to do should you run into any issues with the platform itself. So know that those resources are there for you. And we're going to move into our next presentation shortly. But before we do that, we're going to check in with our friends at Nozzle. We're starting each session by getting a quick hello from one of our partners. So before we move into Brian's presentation, let's hear from the team at Nozzle.
Nozzle is a full SERP monitoring tool. We extract and store all the data from each SERP that you're tracking, which allows you to geek out as much as you want. Let's look at 3 quick examples. First, content teams will love our PAA expansion deliverable. In one example of 500 camping-related keywords, we extracted 419 unique questions from the People Also Ask boxes. In another example, we looked at 49,000 SEO-related keywords and found 276,000 unique SEO-related questions. If you want to peruse this document, go to nozzle.io/SEO-PAA-questions. Second, we recently launched Nozzle Vision, which overlays the metrics on top of a re-rendered SERP. You can visually see rank, pixels from top, CTR, and more for each SERP result. You can also compare SERPs from different dates side by side. And third, learn which domains or URLs own the most featured snippets, top 10 rankings, top 3 rankings, or even which companies show up the most in local pack results. In this example, we can see that PetSmart.com appears 364 times in the top 10 results for this list of 2,000 keywords that I'm tracking. To sign up for a free trial with Nozzle, visit nozzle.io/TechSEOBoost. See you on the inside.
Thanks, Nozzle. I really appreciate it. You guys have been part of the event from the early days. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And next up, we have a presentation on SEO experimentation from Brian Todd. And here's another quick Tech SEO Boost history lesson for everyone. Brian was actually a presenter, actually a panelist at our very first Tech SEO Boost back in 2017 when we hosted it at a co-working space in Boston. And obviously a lot has changed since then, but Brian has remained an important voice and thought leader in the space. So we're excited to have him back. Before we kick things over to him, Paul and Aleda, I'm just curious to hear from you guys. What are you looking forward to in Brian's presentation today, and why are you excited to have him back on the lineup?
Brian is incredible. I think very few people outside of Brian have had as much experience with SEO A/B testing as him through his various roles in SEO growth and product at Airbnb, Angie's List, and now Coinbase. His experience on this topic is really second to none.
100%. I'm so very excited because actually this is a very hot topic nowadays, right? SEO A/B test. And I think it's important that we understand how to properly design the experiments so they are valid and how to approach them step by step. So I'm so very looking forward to his presentation too. And we'd love to hear more also about his particular experiences across all of these impressive organizations where he had been able to implement this type of test. So I'm very looking forward to hear much more about Brian, and let's go and watch his presentation.
Hey, thanks for the introduction. I'm super excited to be here, and let's get started. So I'm here to talk about how to run SEO experimentations. Now, this talk isn't just going to be about like how to run SEO experiments, but also how to like just run experiments as a growth team. I've heard a lot of feedback about like how to run SEO experiments and like the downsides of it. And honestly, all the downsides that I've really heard people say are a result of just like not being able to run a lean and agile growth team. So I will also be going over that. So a little bit about me. I used to be a product manager at AngelList. I used to work at Strava, and I used to lead SEO at Airbnb. And all these different companies, I basically led and run the SEO strategy. So at AngelList, I ended up 5xing growth to core pages. Strava also 5x in growth to core pages, and Airbnb, we end up increasing traffic by about 25%, if not more, but it's been a couple of years since then. But yeah, so I am pretty decent at SEO. I currently work at Coinbase. I'm also a growth product manager there, and I'll be leading the SEO strategy as well as international growth. But enough about me. Let's just talk about what exactly is SEO experimentation. Are going to be a couple of assumptions here. You're all here at Tech Boost, so I am assuming that you are familiar with SEO. Organic traffic needs to be a main driver of your business. I say this a lot because a lot of startups do come up to me and talk to me like, how do you go and run SEO experiments? I'm like, dude, your startup has 0 organic traffic and you started like 6 months ago. Like it's not for you right now. So like organic traffic needs to be a main driver of your business. It has to like, I don't know, like at least 40% of your traffic has to be organic traffic, and it has to be to pages that actually matter. Like, if you get 90% organic traffic and it's all to your homepage, like that's not going to particularly help. And the last assumption is that you have thousands of pages. So this experimentation framework is going to be less helpful if you are working on like small blogs where like you're like a small blogging site, or like small sites where like you're manually creating blog posts and things like that. I'm thinking more like this is specifically targeted towards helping people with programmatic pages. So like if you're in e-commerce, or like if you were Airbnb where you have like tens of thousands of pages that are generated programmatically, when you're thinking about like SEO and product at scale, this will help you out a lot. And but on the other hand, if you want to go and like think about this for, I don't know, a small blogging website, it's like you might be able to use some of what I say, but I haven't tested it for websites such as those, so just keep those things in mind. Regardless, you'll at least learn a little bit, and you'll hear me have some very strong opinions about things that potentially don't matter. But hey, at least that's pretty funny. What is an SEO experimentation framework? It's like any normal A/B test you'd run, but it's cooler and it's different. But you can test a ton of cool stuff, but the one thing that I will caveat is that you can only test on-page elements. So if you want to test your title tags, you want to test your meta descriptions, you want to test image alt tags, you want to test different types of content on there, that's all fine and good. But like the things that you can't test is like obviously things like, oh, if I built like 5 links, well, you've got 5 links. You can't test that. But like the big thing that you can't test without some serious engineering work or working with a data scientist is internal linking. That's because the way that A/B tests work is that you have a control and you have a treatment, right? And then if you're testing internal linking, you're adding internal linking to your treatment pages. The pages that get treatment aren't the pages that are affected. So in order to like actually go and analyze that, it requires a lot of extra work. So the only thing I will say is that if you really care about doing it, you're going to need to find a data scientist in order to help you. That unfortunately is out of my realm of expertise. Other than that, you can basically run anything you want as long as it's on the single page. So just keep that in mind, but I'll get more into it later. But like the important thing about being able to run these A/B tests is that like you are able to know with certainty how effective your changes are. This is really big because in SEO, we take a lot of what Google says as gospel. You listen to, I would say, Matt Cutts, but Matt Cutts doesn't exist anymore. Well, he exists, but whatever, it's fine. Like for certain, whatever changes you make have an actual positive or negative impact on the on your website. And that's really big because with whatever Google says, with what people on Twitter say, with what your friends say, with what your colleagues say, you don't actually know what works and what doesn't. And how is it useful? So it really takes the guesswork out of SEO, like I said previously. And you get to learn and test all the boundaries of SEO safely, because if something goes wrong, you can roll it back. If you go and roll out a title tag that you thought was going to be amazing and you lose traffic, now you know that this title tag doesn't work, and then now you can roll it back, wait a week to let everything reset and test out a new one. You're not just like rolling things out blindly hoping that like, hey, I did a lot of research, so this is probably right, which like I'm sure that you've done before, and obviously I have done before. So like this is why it's super helpful. So like one of the things that I think Paul Shapiro actually retweeted that I didn't see was this tweet from Barry Shores. It says, Gary also said it is valuable to have title tags longer than the visible portion in the search results. And for as long as I can remember, everybody says that your title tag needs to be between 55 to 60 characters. Well, the Airbnb team has known this since 2017. For us as a competitive advantage, I have known this for years. So wherever I go, I'm able to use this knowledge and then basically, go up against your competitors a little bit easier because I run these types of experiments. I'm able to know because I can test the boundaries of SEO as safely as I want, because no matter what happens, I know exactly what the impact is and whether or not we need to roll it back. And if this is what I know, then imagine what other things that I do know that I'm not telling anybody else. And I won't tell you here because it's a competitive advantage. So by being able to roll out your own SEO experimentation framework, you're able to poke holes into common SEO beliefs or things that Google is saying. And next question to ask is, when is it actually useful? When you run SEO experiments, you are not running it on everything that you can think of. You only run it when you have something to learn or to test. Or the other one is if leadership wants you to prove out your wins. But really, the first one is what you need to keep in mind, right? So if your page has a really terrible title tag, let's say you have a website with 1,000 pages and they all have the same title tag. You're like, okay, I want to make it better. And you go and you programmatically generate title tags for every single one. Don't test it. You're not learning anything. If every single title tag is the exact same piece of text, and then you implement a semi-relevant title tag, yes, it will perform better. You don't need a test in order to learn that. Only run these tests when you have something to learn. Don't run them for the sake of running tests, because that's just going to slow you down. When you go from 0 to 1, just get to the 1. It doesn't matter. But once you're in the optimizing portion, that's when this SEO experimentation framework is going to be most helpful to you. When you have what you think are good title tags, and now you want to get to the next percent. When you're at 90% there and you want to get to 95%, this is where it's going to help you a lot. When you're starting at 0%, implement all the basic stuff. And the second one is more helpful if you're working at a larger company and leadership needs you to prove out your wins. So at Airbnb, that's exactly what we had to do. Every single change that we made, we needed to run it through an experiment, because if we got a 5% increase, we took that 5% increase in traffic and applied a conversion rate to it and say, this is the amount of nights that we booked. And then we take the amount of nights we booked in the quarter and present to leadership. But we needed to do that in order to prove out that, hey, the work that the team is doing is actually helpful. So these are the two things that I would say it's helpful with. There might be other ones, but make sure, the only thing I can say for a fact is that if 2 is not a big deal to you, that you need to make sure that you're not running tests just for the sake of running tests. You need to make sure that you're running it with a specific hypothesis in mind. Experiment when you have something to learn, and run experiments as they're needed, not because you can. And the other thing is embody a growth mindset. You need to make sure that you're trying to learn as much as possible and that you're trying to do impactful things to the product. Remember that getting traffic is just a vanity metric at the end of the day, right? It's really cool to set I5X traffic at Angels and I5X traffic at Strava, but what was the actual impact that you had on the business? So that's what experimentation is that you need to make sure that whatever the experiments you're running into, they do ladder into something. Make sure you have a hypothesis that you can test into. And if you're not learning, then basically you're failing. You need to be every single experiment you run, you should try to make sure that you are learning something from everything that you ship. Oh, and obviously ship often, ship fast. That is the gold standard for whether or not you're good at your job, right? It's not that oh, I have 5x traffic. No, it's you have a bunch of hypotheses. Did you test them? Did you ship them? And did you ship them quickly? If you spend too much time going running around and parading and talking about SEO on Twitter and saying I have an experimentation framework and I ran 5 experiments last week, that doesn't mean anything. Make sure you ship quickly. That's the only thing that I'll talk more about that later, but make sure that you have a strong growth culture when you're running these types of experiments. And honestly, I'm going to hammer this in because this happens. Know the difference between opportunity and optimization. And with an SEO experimentation framework, most of it's going to be optimization. You should probably not be using this experimentation framework in order to test opportunity. If you're creating an entirely new product, so at Airbnb, we have places to stay in San Francisco, and we're okay, now we want to expand our product, right? We're they're an SEO product, so it went from places to stay in San Francisco to places to stay near a specific event or places to stay near a specific landmark or point of interest, right? The landmark or point of interest or the event, that is a new product line, that is a new keyword space that we're trying to capture. That's more of an opportunity, and we did not run this specific SEO A/B testing framework in order to test, hey, does this work? I mean, like, of course it's going to work. You're going from 0 to something. You're going to get marginally more traffic. For opportunities, you need to work with somebody else in order to figure out, are you cannibalizing old traffic? But for the most part, you're not going to be able to figure out through this framework. But with optimization, like, this is where this framework shines. So just know that this is used for optimization. I've said this for the past 3 slides. I need to make sure that you are listening to me. So the next question is, how do we build it? And you're gonna want to build this by yourself, and you're gonna want to build this in-house. So the big problem with most SEO experimentation platforms is that most of them use JavaScript in order to do bucketing, right? So when they try to decide whether a page is a control or treatment, it runs a piece of JavaScript in order to decide whether or not the page goes in control or it goes in treatment. And the big problem is that, one, Google doesn't execute JavaScript, so then you're relying on Google to be executing JavaScript on that specific page in order to actually do the bucketing. And what you end up doing is you provide an inconsistent experience to Google, right? So sometimes these pages are going to be, rendered with JavaScript and they might be control or treatment, or they might not be rendering JavaScript and they'll always be in control. And like for a single page, if you have a single page toggling between 3 or 4 different times between one of the 2 buckets, results of your experiment are not going to be consistent, and I wouldn't trust them. The large majority of them using JavaScript for me is a non-starter. And the ones that don't use JavaScript as an experimentation for their experimentation platform, the problem with them is that then you need to route it through their own CDN. And that is a issue on multiple scales, because unless you're a very small startup and you're fine with it, you are piping a lot of sensitive information from your servers over to a random CDN servers that they can intercept at any time. How is their security? Is it working well? It prevents it shows up another large amount of problems that you can run into. So I don't know, for the most part, if you really want to do this, you're going to want to do this by yourself. You want to do this in-house. And it'll be a little bit of work when you first start, but in my experience, it's been, worth it. To explain the difference between these two, just so that I can get a bit more tactical, regular A/B tests, they're bucketed on the user level. So users will get the same experience across the entire site, right? So for example, if I am a user and I'm visiting whatever website, and the experiment we're trying to run is, does the blue buy now button increase conversions? That means that when this user visits any PDP on this website, the button is then changed. That's because it is bucketed by the user. The user gets a specific experience based on whether or not they are in control or treatment. If they're in control, they get red. If they're in treatment, they get blue. And no matter what happens, they will see the exact same experience. The difference, this doesn't work for SEO because this provides a very inconsistent experience for Google. For example, if you wanted to test a title tag, then if you go to this experience rather than this blue or red, then that means that every time Google hits the website, it is a new user, so then it gets a new title. It then gets a new title tag for every single page, right? One load can have the control title tag, and a subsequent load can then have the treatment title tag. So this obviously presents a very inconsistent experience. So when Google hits the page multiple times, it's going to get bucketed between control and treatment randomly. And then Google's not getting consistent, accurate information in order to actually, decide what the topic of the page is. So regular A/B experimentation frameworks don't work for SEO because of this inconsistency. And then the difference between regular A/B tests and SEO A/B tests is that SEO A/B tests are bucketed on the page level. So users will get a different experience based on the page that they're on. This might be an issue. There's a ton of issues with this, but if you care about SEO A/B tests, this is what you need to do. And this provides Google with a consistent experience. And your users might have a funny experience when they start switching between your PDPs, but it's usually SEO stuff and nobody really cares. You're changing the content at the bottom of the page that nobody's reading, or you're changing the title tag between different pages. Users don't particularly notice that. In the past 4 or 5 years I've been doing it, I don't think I've ever had a single user report calling us out for A/B tests. So it's something you need to worry a little bit less on, but users will get a different experience based on the page that they're on. So you're running an SEO A/B test and you're testing whether or not you have an optimized piece of content on specific pages or not, right? So in control, you have the roses PDP where there is no optimized content. And on the right side, you have treatment, which is the lilies PDP, and you have optimized content. So like now this SEO A/B test treats Google as the sole user, and Google is now able to get a very, very consistent experience whenever it visits the site. Every single time it hits the roses page, it will always get non-optimized content. Every single time it hits the lilies page, it will get optimized content. So now when Google is trying to go and rank, thousands of pages, then it will see that, on the treatment side, that all of the treatment pages have this optimized content, no matter how many times it hits the page, and all the pages to control will then have non-optimized content. And this is super important because like SEO A/B tests, they are designed in order to make sure that Google is the user you are bucketing, rather than with regular A/B tests where any user is what you're testing, right? That's the big difference in like how you need to do your bucketing, right? Bucketing needs to happen on the page level. So let's get a little bit more tactical. I know I've been talking pretty high level. I'm going to go walk you through what you actually need to know in order to run these experiments. So prerequisites: you need the ability to bucket, control, and treatment on the page level. This is what I was talking about before. For any given page, you need to make sure that it provides a consistent experience, that whenever you hit that page, you either are in control or you are in treatment. That is the only way to do this. You can't do this with like, I don't know, like people have asked me if they can do this with Optimizely. As far as I know, you're unable to do that. So like this might be some type of backend work that you need to roll out on your website in order to be able to do this. You need the ability to track incoming organic traffic to your website. So incoming organic traffic is going to be the metric that we are going to be looking at in order to determine success. There are other things that you can use. All of them, I believe, are inconsistent or just heavily sampled. Some people like use clicks from Google Search Console, or they go and they track keyword or the keywords if they're like rising or falling. All that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, like all of these things lead to more organic traffic. So like we're just going to be looking at organic traffic. You need to get as close to the source as possible, but organic traffic is going to be your deciding factor on whether or not the page is successful. Did the page get more traffic, or did they get less traffic? It doesn't matter if Google Search Console or you're rising or falling various keywords. If you have a properly designed experiment, then like if you get more organic traffic, then your experiment is successful. Now, there's obviously a element of good faith in here, where you need to make sure that the experiments that you're running are good experiments, not trying to rank for terrible keywords. That is something that you need to do yourself. If you can solve that problem, then incoming organic traffic is going to be the metric that you should be optimizing towards. Everything else doesn't matter, because everything else you could potentially be tracking just leads to more organic traffic coming to your website. This is obviously for large websites with programmatic pages. So if you really care about ranking for one specific keyword, then you can go ahead and like make that call yourself. But if you increase traffic by 10% because of this SEO experimentation framework, and you drop one rank in a big keyword that you care about, does it really matter? I don't know. In my opinion, no, as long as you're bringing in more revenue. But again, that is your call to make. But for the purposes of all the other companies that I've worked at, we've only been looking at incoming organic traffic. And you'll need a decent amount of traffic to your set of pages, and you'll need about 5,000 organic traffic a day to those pages. So for example, if you want to be testing for your PDPs, then you should make sure that like in aggregate, your PDPs have 5,000 organic visitors a day. We'll start with bucketing, and I've already gone through this quite a bit, but there's two ways to do this bucketing, right? You can do this programmatically. And I'm just going to be using the words that engineers have told me, that you take the hash of the URL to decide whether it goes into control or treatment. That's as much as I can tell you. I don't know, I know what a hash is, but if you talk to an engineer, they can help you figure it out. But basically, you can either, do this programmatically, where you have, the backend decide whether or not a URL goes to control treatment, or if your site is small enough, then you can try to do this manually. So you can literally just go and just define, these are all the URLs for treatment, these are all the URLs for control. But the only thing you need to do is just make sure that you have some way of bucketing it. If you do it manually, I encourage you to try to keep the traffic buckets somewhat equal, but that's not a requirement. If you do it programmatically and it's assigned randomly, then the active randomization should theoretically get you equal traffic. In actuality, it doesn't, but we will account for that. But these are the two ways to do it. And then you need to track incoming traffic And the data source needs to be as close to the source as possible. So at Airbnb, we had a visitors table to log in every visitor, how they came into the website. So we used that. We did the same thing with Strava. But like, don't use GA in order to do it, because like the data in GA is heavily sampled. So not heavily sampled, it's sampled. It's not going to be accurate. I don't know how many times I've seen pages where like, you know, my bottom like 100 pages all had like 7 visitors. Like, the data is sampled. You can't you can't use it. You can't trust it in order to make a decision on the experiment. So like, pull the data from as close to source as possible. Go look at your logs in order to figure out like the incoming traffic for your specific subset of pages. I can't emphasize this enough. If you use other analytics platforms that give you data directly from the source, then great, but make sure that it's as close to the source as possible. Step 1, design, launch, experiment. So design, implement, and launch your experiment. It's very, very easy. So I will say that you should run 1 experiment at a time to start. If you feel more confident, you can start running more. But unless you have a ton of traffic, I would recommend you just start at 1 experiment, and you probably want to keep it about 1 experiment. And make sure you roll out your experiment to your entire website. So I get a lot of questions about whether or not, what if we only roll it out to like the mobile version or the desktop version? Dude, make your life easier. Just roll it out to the entire website and then see how it goes. Anything else is like you're going to be complicating things. You're going to provide Google inconsistent experiences. And like with SEO experimentation, you need to make sure that Google gets the most consistent experience as possible, which is why we're doing the page level bucketing, which is why I recommend you roll out your experiment to your entire website and not to just like a specific subset of whether or not you are in desktop or mobile. Step 2. So this is the hard part. Wait. For the most part, you need to wait about 2 to 4 weeks. SEO experiments take a lot longer to show impact than normal A/B tests. And even if you see impact early on, you need to wait at least a week before you conclude anything. Typically, they run about 2 to 4 weeks before you can conclude. If you do it any earlier, you won't know if it works. Like, it could be a temporary spike. Again, seriously, wait. It's just the nature of running experiments. Your results need to settle. And then step 3 is analysis. And the way this is going to work is that we're going to be looking at the difference in expected difference of traffic. I hate saying those words because it sounds like a tongue twister. But basically, you're going to compare the difference in traffic pre-experiment between control and treatment, and then look at the difference in traffic post-experiment. And the delta between those 2 differences is your traffic gain or loss. This is kind of what it looks like. If you can see on the left, you want to look at the green and red bars. That is the average traffic for control and treatment. That is the small difference. That is the difference in traffic. On the right side is the, I think, brown and purple bars, and that's the difference post-experiment. So then you go and you look at the difference in traffic between the 2 averages, and that is the increase in traffic that you have. Difference sounds complicated. You're all intelligent. Probably sounds a lot easier for you to parse, but this is basically what it is. This graph makes things a little bit easier. And then step 4, conclude. So you can conclude your experiment if you run this for more than 2 weeks, and if your results are statistically significant. Someone should tell you that. If you have a data scientist, they can tell you. But if you don't, launch it if it looks good. Like, at the end of the day, we're all trying to ship impactful things and bring more useful traffic to the website. If the difference looks like what you see in the bottom right, then yeah, just launch it. Like, that's probably fine. But seriously, like, wait the 2 weeks. It's like it's hard, because if you see big impact, you're going to want to go and launch it as soon as possible. But you want to wait the 2 weeks just to be sure that you didn't have a random spike of traffic. I've talked enough about, let's design an actual experiment. To set the stage, let's say that we're a growth product manager at Figma on the community team. We want to grow organic traffic to these community pages, and these are the PDPs, right? These are like the different designs that you can find on Figma and that you can go ahead and browse. I'm like, okay, we should probably want more traffic to go to land on these pages, because 1, it's a ton of user-generated content, and it's all high-quality content because designers want to show off the cool things that they've worked on. So like, this is a perfect example of a programmatic website with thousands of pages that we can do page level bucketing on, right? Like, design the experiment. The current title tag is name of file, and then description of file that gets truncated. So it says Figma-iOS and iPadOS 14 UI kit, blah, blah, blah. And the funniest part is that they've injected HTML into the actual title tag. So that p tag actually exists inside of the title tag, and then you can see the title tag ends. Redesign the title tag so it has the name of the file, and then a pipe, and then tags that the user has tagged with each specific file. So now this is Figma iOS, iPad OS 14, and then it says 14 alert Apple Dark emoji iOS iPhone kit Lite. This is obviously way better than whatever we were looking at here, where it says excited to share the latest iOS, iPad OS 14 UI kit for Figma. We basically just did iPad OS 14 UI kit for Figma twice in the title tag, and you also have like a break in the title. This is better, hopefully better, and it gives a little bit more context to the title tag and just tells Google what the information is rather than whatever this is. Cool, so now we've designed the experiment, let's roll it out. So this is, again, gonna be a straight A/B test, 50-50 treatment versus control to all community file pages. So like for 50% of any of the file page that so not just this Landify landing page UI kit, but for any single page on Figma for this specific PDP, half the pages are going to get the new structure of name of file and tags, and the other control are going to get the name of file plus description of file that gets truncated with HTML. So like that is the rollout that we're doing. We've designed the experiment, rolling out a 50-50, and we are making sure that we are rolling this out to both desktop and mobile versions of the site, although they're responsive, so I don't think it matters. But wait, so title tag experiments are usually quite impactful. It'd probably take you you'll probably get early signal within like the first 3 days to a week. But again, wait the 2 weeks before running the analysis. This is a thing that my data, I emphasize this so much because there's no better way to piss up a data scientist than trying to conclude an experiment early. They are very particular with that. And in fact, my data scientists have joked before that they need to take away analytics access from me so that I can't see the results of experiments, because then I start bothering them too much. So this is a thing that I keep in mind, is that you just need to wait. And then analysis. We'll look at the expected difference in traffic. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, like, you work with the data scientist or you do it yourself, and make sure that you're pulling data from the correct, data source. Again, don't use Google Analytics. If you can pull raw data, pull the raw data. And then if results are positive and are statistically significant, again, if you were able to make the call they're statistically significant, launch 100%. If it's neutral or inconclusive after like a month, like, you can use your own judgment on whether or not you want to launch it, right? Like, if you truly believe that it is a better user experience and that it might marginally help SEO, feel free to launch it. But if you see a negative, like if you see a drop in traffic, then you probably want to go and not launch it. But again, like the SEO experimentation framework, these are like, it is a way in order to help you make decisions, right? Like you can choose whether or not how closely you want to tie your decisions to the actual results. For me, I always launch it based on whether or not on like what the experimentation framework says. The only time I don't do it, again, is this neutral or inconclusive, at which point I think I end up not launching the most of the experience we have if they're not impactful. But again, that's not to say that you can't do it. If you believe that your change is going to be impactful, then you can go ahead and make the change. Like, for example, I've run experiments before where like the addition of an H1. So we didn't have an H1 on the page. We added an H1 to the page. It had zero effect. It didn't increase or decrease traffic at all. It had zero effect. Very much to my surprise. And we actually, at that point, we're like, okay, let's run it back. Like, let's go, reset the experiment, wait a couple of months, and then run the experiment again in order to see what happens. And like, again, we actually saw like a slight negative impact in traffic, and we're like, what is going on here? But at the end of the day, it's just like, dude, like an H1 is going to be helpful to your users no matter what. And if it's neutral, it's fine. Just go ahead and launch it. So again, use your best judgment for neutral and inconclusive, and launch things as you want to, but knowing that you have actual hard evidence on whether or not a change is going to be impactful or not. And then the most important step that most SEO teams don't do at this point is iterating. So you need to document your learnings, because all this information gets lost over time. So like you need to start documenting your learnings, start thinking about other experiments that you can do and how you can improve on the current ones that you have just run. Because it's not just about, oh look, I increased traffic by 10% because of this title tag. Great, I'm gonna go drink a beer and celebrate. It's about like, hey, how do I go and take the learnings that we have, put it into a document, share it with the wider team, come up with good insights as to why it's worked better than previous experiments, and think about how do you go and make the next like improvement on top of that. Because like SEO is a shifting landscape, right? Everybody knows this. It changes every single day. So you can't expect the title tag change that you made that a 10% impact, that's not going to last for like a year or 2 years or 3 years. It'll last for a little bit, and then your competitors are going to see that you're overtaking them in traffic or your rankings, or that like your title tags look a little bit better than theirs does, and then they're going to go ahead and then iterate, and they're going to copy what you're doing, and then all of a sudden the playing field is level again. So you need to make sure that like you are doing a very, very good job staying on top of all of your learnings and being able to extract insights, and then start working with your team in order to go and come up with other experiments. Because at some point in time, like your competitors are going to catch up, and then you're going to start right back over. So again, make sure you iterate. This is super important. Things to keep in mind: the impact of experiments will decay. A 5% increase in traffic will not last forever. You all should know this. This is what happens if like you don't ship a title tag and expect it to work for the rest of the time. You can't expect experiments that you ship to last for the rest of the time, right? So keep your expectations that like you will always be experimenting. Don't be afraid to ship neutral experiments. Experiments are to inform your decision. I've already said this before, but if it's neutral, use your best judgment. If it's negative, I would probably not launch it. But again, their experiments are there to inform your decision. So, if you feel like you want to launch it anyways, go ahead. Or if there's, outside pressure, then at least you have some data in order to back it up. I've done that before. We're just like, oh, like, hey, if we want to launch this feature, this is a 10% drop to organic traffic. Take that information, present it to leadership, and like do with it what you will, but knowing that like what you were doing has a pretty big like negative impact on traffic. In which case, like then you're fine. And experimentation should not be slowing you down. I've said this at the beginning, I'm going to say it again. You run the experiments when you have something to prove or something to learn, or if leadership really wants you to. But like experimentation should really not be slowing you down. It should actually be making your decision-making process faster, because now you have like information, you're able to book wins more quickly, rather than just like not knowing where to even start working on. Because like once you start experimenting, then like what are the specific things you can tweak and modify, what levers you can pull in order to actually like have an impact on traffic. You can take those learnings, and you can take that and bring it with you everywhere, right? So like I know most of you guys are working in agencies. If you're working in an agency and you have an SEO experimentation framework, you then make the process so much faster when you work on other clients, because you know what's worked in the past, and you know what's worked in the past and what hasn't worked in the past, and you empirically you have evidence, so like it's not so like now you're not just like doing things that you think could work. You can go to your client and say, I know that if we do internal linking, we will increase traffic by 25%. I've done this for 4 of the sites. We've run this experimentation process. I want you to prioritize this. Like it's going to be much like the beginning might be a little bit slow, but once you start booking those learnings and those wins, you can very, very quickly like increase your velocity, because you have evidence. So yeah, like experimentation is not going to be slowing you down. And if at any point it's slowing you down, you need to stop and think about your process as to why it is slowing you down, and figure it out. The last one is have a good growth and experimentation culture. Ideate, iterate, test, and launch. So come up with ideas, iterate on the ideas, test those ideas, and launch those ideas. And like the important thing is that like you need to launch, like you can run as many experiments as possible. You can have as much cool learnings about things that don't work, but at the end of the day, like your success for your agency or for your company is going to be centered around whether or not you've launched impactful things. So you need to make sure that you keep those in mind. And like this ideation, iteration, and testing, those are all lead ups in order for you to launch. So just make sure that you are continuously doing those things. And the last thing that I want to cover is just the general growth process. Now that you're in this experimentation mode, you need to make sure you have a decent process for you to move forward. You can't just like run experiments as you want, just kind of do whatever. Have a specific framework that you are following in order to actually like come up with ideas, test them, iterate them, and then end up launching them. Because otherwise you're going to be slowing yourself down. So like this is a general growth process, and some of it like you can skip, some of it you don't need to. But like for the first one, it's like research and analysis. Figure out what the problem you're trying to solve is, and like try to figure out what your own website is doing wrong. We're all SEOs, we're all already doing this. You go to a website and you see, oh man, this site has terrible internal linking. Oh, like these title tags are terrible. Like what is this meta? Like you have all these insights as you're going through them, and like things that you want to fix or things that you want to add. So like that is your research. We should think about internal linking. Think about larger problems, not this one specific thing that you want to fix. Then from then on is bottoms up ideation. So like you want to make sure that you alone are not the person that is coming up with all the ideas, right? Like the most successful experiments that ever come out of Airbnb, they're not like, most of them weren't my ideas. They were all the engineers or the designers on the team, because like, you know, your designers, engineers, researchers, they are all part of this process. They all see the wins that you're booking. They're all learning SEO. They know what they're seeing, what levers you're pulling, and they're going to come up with ideas themselves. So like you need to work with as many people as possible in order to come up with ideas. You are not the star here. The star is the team. The more traffic that you grow, the more useful traffic that you grow, the better your team looks. So like don't run around saying, oh, I ran this experiment. Like the team really is the star here, and they're going to come up with the best ideas, because like they're going to think of things that you're not going to be able to think about. From working with a lot of people, everybody's always like, oh yeah, I came with this idea, or like I want to test this. Like it's not just about you. You need to rely on everybody, because a diverse set of ideas is going to be far more impactful than something coming from just like one single person. And the next one, after you have all this backlog of ideas, is just like grouping and prioritizing ideas. Some of the ideas are going to be fantastic, and some of them are going to be terrible. I've worked with so many teams, and like I would say that like 60 to 70% of all of our ideas are terrible. Not just because like some of them haven't done SEO before. Like half of my SEO ideas are terrible, and like they make it to the bottom of the list. And like you're kind of nice about like, oh, maybe this is lower priority, but really it's just like anything that, oh, I'm just like, dude, this sucks. We're not going to work on this at all. But like you need to group and prioritize all your ideas, right? Yeah, it's just like you have a backlog, come with 100 ideas, prioritize them. It's like, and at that point, that's probably on the SEO person to do. So like you had the bottom up ideation where you pulled in everything from the rest of the team, and then now that you have all the ideas, you want to use your expertise in order to figure out what the actual prioritization of this is, because like at the end of the day, you are going to have the most insight as to what is most effective, but you won't necessarily have all the insight in order to come up with all the ideas. And then from then on, it's just like, all right, scope the experiment. What are the constraints for the experiment? Like, what set of pages do we want to go ahead and roll this out on? And from then on, like this is the fun stuff, just rapid prototyping, right? Like you went from opportunity scoping, and now you're in the experimentation learning phase. What can you do in order to go and roll out this experiment as quickly as possible? What designs do you need to come up with? Like what do the engineers need to do? So from then on, just like execute the experiment, let it run, go and run the analysis, and then from then on, just like insights and sharing. And like I've already touched on this before, but like growth is only possible when you and your entire team are able to know what works and what doesn't work. And like you need to make sure that like you go and document every single experiment that you run, that you go and you have all these insights, and then you go and you're sharing it with the wider company. Because the best way for you to kill it at SEO isn't just to make sure that the SEO team knows that what you're doing and that you're being successful, but like the entire company can see the effects of SEO, right? Like if you increase traffic by 20%, and then in that exact same time period, your search booking team or at Airbnb, like the search team or the booking team, you see that like 20% more people or like 5% more people end up booking, then like, oh man, like this is the impact that SEO has, because now you're able to go and like tie like the work that you're doing, and not only can you prove to leadership, hey, my team increased traffic by 5%, if this should lead to an X amount % in bookings, but you're able to go and take this to other teams, and they're able to understand exactly why SEO is important, and that will help you like execute and do things so much quicker and faster. Every single step here is super important, but the one thing that I would prioritize is one, the bottoms up ideation. You're not the star, your team is, and insights and sharing, where you take all the stuff that you've learned and like you make sure that your SEO team and growth team can go and look at that forever. Like no matter what, no matter how many personnel changes you have, no matter what happens, people are able to actually go ahead and read it, and that like you can go and share it to other teams in order to prove your impact. Because like that's how you get your entire company on board SEO. And that's how you start creating like a very efficient SEO machine, is when the entire company is like understands the impact of SEO and is fully bought into it. Thanks. I think this is the end of the presentation. I just want to thank you for your time. Hit me up on social media if you have any questions. I'll try to come up with some intelligent responses. And yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Brian. That was fantastic.
That was an impressive session indeed. I loved how he went through also how he said so many different type of experiments at these organizations indeed, and his particular experience setting the frameworks too. So yeah, very, very impressive. And I know that we have been already here sitting for a while. So let's do a short break before going to the next session. See you there.